The fog thickened, settling like a heavy blanket over the train station. Max, who had spent the last 9 years of his life devotedly waiting for a figure that had long since faded into memory, stood at the edge of the platform. His coat, once sleek and healthy, was now weathered from the harsh elements. The cold seemed to have seeped into his very bones, but he didn't mind. His purpose was clear. The wind carried the distant sound of trains arriving and departing, but Max's ears were trained on a single sound, the faintest footstep, the softest murmur of a voice. He was waiting for the one who had promised to return. It had been 9 years since Daniel left. 9 years of standing guard on the platform, his eyes ever vigilant. Daniel had been his owner, his best friend, the one who had raised him from a pup. The day Daniel left was seared into Max's memory. He could still recall the way Daniel knelt down, his hands resting gently on Max's head. "I'll be back soon, buddy," Daniel had promised, his eyes filled with love and uncertainty. "Stay here. Wait for me." At first, Max had tried to understand. He would wait for hours, his tail wagging with anticipation every time he heard the rumble of a train. But time passed, and the seasons changed, and Daniel did not return. Max had no way of knowing that Daniel's departure was not just for a few days or a few months. Daniel had been deployed, sent away to serve in the military, and the distance between them had only grown. As the years wore on, Max had settled into his routine. Every morning he would arrive at the station, his nose sniffing the air, his eyes scanning the tracks. He had become a fixture, a symbol of unwavering loyalty. Some commuters had begun to recognize him. "There's Max," they would say with a nod, offering him scraps of food or a pat on the head. But Max never wavered in his mission. He knew that one day his person would return, but that day had not yet come. Sarah, the kind-hearted volunteer from the local animal shelter, had first met Max years ago when she had stopped by the station to grab some coffee. She'd seen the dog, sitting there on the platform, alone, eyes fixed on the horizon, waiting. There was something in his expression that tugged at her heart, a quiet desperation that was impossible to ignore. At first, she thought Max was just a stray. But as time passed, she realized this dog had a purpose. Sarah began visiting Max every day, bringing him food, water, and comfort. She tried to coax him away from the station, urging him to come with her to the shelter, but Max would have none of it. Every time she tried to get him to leave, he would simply shake his head and return to his spot. He would settle down, his body weary but his spirit unwavering. His eyes never left the tracks. Daniel had told him to wait, and that's exactly what he was doing. Sarah couldn't bear to see Max so lost, so devoted to a person who had long since vanished. She started bringing others to the station, hoping someone might recognize the dog, or perhaps even remember Daniel. But no one knew anything. The mystery of Max only deepened with time. Michael, the local journalist, had been one of those who stopped to inquire. Intrigued by the story, he began researching Max's past, talking to people who had seen the dog over the years, piecing together the fragments of a puzzle that seemed to have no solution. But nothing had prepared Sarah for what she would witness that cold evening. As the station grew quieter, Sarah noticed a change in Max's behavior. He stood up suddenly, his ears twitching, his eyes wide. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end. He sniffed the air again, his nostrils flaring. Sarah felt her heart skip a beat. Something was happening, something that could only mean one thing. Max started running toward the platform's edge. "Max, no!" Sarah cried, her voice full of panic. But Max was already racing toward the tracks, moving with a speed and agility that belied his age. His paws pounded the ground, and his eyes locked onto something in the distance. Then the sound of a train grew louder. The headlight of the approaching train broke through the fog like a ghost in the night. It was coming fast, and Max was too close to the tracks. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. She sprinted after him, but the train was getting closer, its whistle now deafening. In that moment, time seemed to stretch. Every second felt like an eternity. "Please, Max, don't do this," Sarah whispered, her voice breaking as she ran faster. But just as the train reached the platform, Max skidded to a halt. His paws dug into the concrete, his body trembling. The train screeched to a halt, its wheels grinding against the tracks. The sound was deafening, but Max stood still, frozen in place, his eyes locked on the figure that had appeared in the distance. A man was standing there, wearing a military uniform. His face was covered by a cap, and his features were obscured by the fog. But there was no mistaking the familiar shape, the posture, the way he stood. Max's tail began to wag, slowly at first, then faster, as if the dam of emotion inside him had finally burst. The man slowly walked toward Max, his steps heavy, his face pale and worn. As he got closer, Sarah saw the tears in his eyes. She recognized the man immediately. It was Daniel. "Max," Daniel whispered, his voice raw with emotion. He knelt down slowly, his hands trembling as he reached for the dog who had been waiting for him all these years. Max rushed forward, his body leaping into Daniel's arms, his face pressed against his chest. For a moment, the world seemed to stop. Daniel whispered through his tears, "You waited. You waited for me, didn't you?" Max's tail thumped against Daniel's chest, and for the first time in years, the two of them were reunited. But as the reunion unfolded, something changed in Max. He seemed to grow weaker, his body sinking into Daniel's arms. Sarah, who had been watching from a distance, took a hesitant step forward. "Is he okay?" she asked, her voice trembling. Daniel looked down at Max, his face filled with confusion and pain. Max's once bright eyes seemed clouded, and his breathing was shallow. "He waited for too long," Daniel whispered. Max had given everything to this moment, the moment when he finally saw his beloved owner again. But the years of waiting had taken a toll. Max's body could no longer endure the strain. In Daniel's arms, Max let out one last sigh. His eyes fluttered closed, and he relaxed into the embrace of the man who had promised to return. As Sarah knelt beside them, tears streaming down her face, she realized that this was the true story of loyalty, of a dog's love that transcended time. Daniel held Max tightly, whispering, "I'm so sorry, buddy. I'm so sorry I wasn't here sooner." And in the quiet of the train station, surrounded by the fading echoes of the trains, the last of Max's breath was taken, not in fear, but in peace, knowing that he had fulfilled his promise to wait.